If you fail to meet your targets, then you might be beaten. You might be punished in other ways. If you refuse to work, you might be put in torture rooms, which is normally second to top room where really horrendous things happen. But if you fail to meet your targets over a certain amount of time, you either get sold somewhere else, or for women, they often get sold into forced prostitution, and online sort of like forced porn.
How can I help? How can I be useful in ending needless suffering? Do not be afraid of work that has no end.
We have to organize a social movement.
We have an opportunity to lead by example versus just talking, hot air. I think the more people in this fight, the more we grow. Eventually it could change. The people are the ones that can make the change.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Change Agents, an Ironclad original, proudly presented by Montana Knife Company. Today, we're going to be talking about cyber scams and how they are directly tied to slavery in Southeast Asia. Here is an example of how one of these scams work. A person in the US receives a text from an unknown number that seems that it was intended for somebody else. When they reply, informing the texter of the mistake, the texter, of course, apologizes and strikes up a friendly conversation. Their goal is to strike up an ongoing, enduring, and friendly text thread that eventually becomes a friendship or even a romantic relationship. Eventually, they get an offer to be a part of their friend's business/investment/crypto scheme or venture, but only after trust is built up over weeks or even months. From there, they are scammed. My guests today to help discuss this are Nathan Paul Southern and Lindsey Kennedy. They are both investigative journalists covering a wide variety of security and organized crime in some of the world's most fragile environments. They also run the Eyewitness Project, a social enterprise research consultancy that does deep dives into crime, conflict, and corruption, assists in the rescue of human trafficking victims, and advises and trains governments, NGOs, and police forces around the world on identifying and combating organized crime and security threats. Let's dive in. Before we dive in, though, maybe let's give the listeners a little bit of context. Can you guys just do a brief intro and talk about the variety of topics that you cover? And then I think most importantly at the end of that, how did you stumble across this particular type of scam and issue?
Okay. So yeah, we cover quite a broad range of topics. We mostly cover things that are related to organized crime, corruption, and underreported conflicts. They're kind of our big three. So all kinds of organized crime and trafficking. And we actually stumbled into this particular area sort of by accident during COVID. Both of us are normally based in Cambodia, and we were looking into illegal logging, actually. And looking into illegal logging and sort of illegal forest destruction ended up overlapping with where loads of huge Chinese casinos were being built in Cambodia, because a lot of them, in the early stages of building a casino, they'll like illegally cut down all the local forest and sell off all the expensive wood to China. So all of these different flows are kind of connected, right? And so then we're looking at the casinos, and we're looking at all the other ways in which like people working in the casinos sort of stimulate the drug economy or an economy for wildlife products like tiger wine and that kind of thing. And then we realized during COVID that loads of these casinos had also built these enormous compounds for like dormitories for workers, way beyond any number of people that could ever be working.
So
in that
thousands
compound.
in one building.
Yeah, like thousands behind them. And a couple of us, it wasn't just us, there were a few other journalists in Cambodia that were all looking at this at the same time, trying to work out what was going on, because Cambodia had also just banned online gambling. So there was no real reason why you would have these enormous at one point, they might have been serving online gambling customers in China and stuff to get around kind of anti-gambling rules in China. But at this point, there was no real explanation for why they would be there. And when COVID restrictions lifted, why they wouldn't be allowed to leave these buildings. So that's kind of how we started looking into it. And by that point, by the point that we started looking into it, it was already enormous in Cambodia, in Laos, in Myanmar. And we just started realizing this insane scale. And we would be going at that time as well, like a lot of these groups, they were like scam companies. They started as online gambling companies and then scam companies. And they originally were targeting almost exclusively Chinese people. And then at some point, they kind of shifted to targeting people in Western countries. So we kind of initially we actually went to, like, there's an FBI representative in Cambodia, and we went to go and talk to him to ask whether or not he'd seen a big rise in the US of people being scammed. And they had no idea this was even happening. And that's when we realized, like, oh my God, like, the authorities don't know this is happening. And that was basically then turned into 3 years of intensive reporting on this issue, watching it grow around the world, and watching it now turn into a thing where probably millions of people now are enslaved in this all over the world.
Yeah, and I think so. When the news first broke, there was a piece in Reuters that really broke it internationally. We thought after that was about one particular compound in a city called Sihanoukville, which is on the coast in Cambodia. And actually going back to the online gambling thing, basically, yeah, but all forms of gambling are illegal in China, but they really, really will always find a way to do it. So online gambling is a massive thing. So you set up these parts of casinos in places like Cambodia, and you feel this huge online gambling demand in China. But then all the Chinese organized crime groups started coming in 2017, 2018. And then the violence just escalated so much. There were beheadings on the street, there were shootouts, and then under some pressure from the Chinese government, the Cambodian government decided to ban these online facilities, but then had all the real estate, had the transnational criminal networks already set up shop there, so they just shifted into scams and kept doing the online gambling as well, but just illegally. And then we expected when that first broke on this one place, it was called the Chinatown complex, basically, which is about, at that time it was probably about 5 or 6 14, 15-story buildings, and they were completely full of slaves being forced to commit, say, romance and cyber-related scams around the world. So, an example for your listeners will be when you get those texts on your phone that say, "Hey, Stacey, I seen you at the veterinarians today. Can we catch up?" And then you respond saying, "Hey, not Stacey here." Those are, people just expect them to be a few people, around the world trying to scam you. And yeah, that often is the case, but more often than not now is actually forced labor, people who are being enslaved in these enormous compounds, and tortured and killed if they don't do it. And you can have thousands and thousands. We now have about 100,000 people in Cambodia alone who are doing this. And now we've followed this from Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar, the Philippines. We've been out through Europe, places like Croatia and Montenegro. We're doing this as far back as 2018, but just on a smaller scale, and it's been developing. And now it's propped up in Georgia, South America. We were trying to find evidence of this in East Africa earlier this year. We're also looking at some stuff in the Congo, and the thing has just absolutely exploded. The industry's probably worth well over $1 trillion now. Places like Cambodia, it accounts for at least a third of their GDP, just human trafficking. It could be up to 3 times.
We think it's probably more likely to be 3 times. That's a very conservative estimate.
Yeah, so it's absolutely enormous. It's all around the world. There's North Korean involvement. The Russians are involved. Even Russian-Ukrainian groups even cooperating a little bit. In some places in Southeast Asia, on getting this going, there's scam compounds popping up in Kyiv. It's growing massively. When you sorry for this very long explanation we both just given you there, but you can see how when we started looking at this, everyone thought we were crazy. I mean, all of these individual parts have been now proven and well documented by places like the UN. But when we first started taking this to law enforcement bodies, they were like, "Yeah, that sounds mental. There's no way that's happening." It's just so huge.
Not necessarily germane to this topic today, because I want to talk a lot more about the scammers, but I'm thinking about this infrastructure to basically satiate the Chinese online gambling demand. I mean, I'm not an incredible expert on the level of internet connectivity in China, but I was under the impression that it's pretty regulated. Are they getting around that with VPNs, which I've also heard are highly frowned upon in China as it begins with? And is it just the people finding whatever means necessary it is to scratch that particular itch that they have?
Yeah, I think everyone has VPNs in China.
Yeah.
I mean, even even the armies of trolls that are commenting on Twitter, which is also banned in China, are using VPNs to do that. I think it's pretty common.
Yeah, I mean, we were in Fujian province a few weeks back, which is actually where most of the criminal groups and lads come from who are doing this around the world. And you just be in bars and restaurants, and people are just on their phone, just online gambling, just everywhere, quite open. And I thought with China, people would be more scared. It'd be a lot more regulated. But I think when you scratch the surface on China, you realize they're not in as much control as they like to make out, right? And citizens everywhere always find some workarounds. And online gambling is one of those ones where they always find a way. So with the online gambling, it's interesting because one of the things we've been looking at is the links with these scam compounds to football. As you guys say, soccer. But
I was going to say, do you mean football or soccer?
So you've got these enormous companies that are involved in essentially the slave trade. They're just criminal organizations. One of them is called 8xBet. And they are Man City's biggest Asian sponsor. Now, Manchester City are the biggest soccer football club in the entire world, right? Multi-billion-dollar company. And this organization, we've looked into them for years, and they are nothing more than a criminal syndicate, right? They aren't even really able to present a legal person to bring cases when they're brought to court. They're a complete organized crime syndicate that's involved in human trafficking of thousands of people.
Yeah, when they signed the contracts with Man City, they had to hire actors and models, which who were uncovered because people did reverse image searches and realized who they were, to pretend to be the leaders of this company. But the reason that all of these organizations keep sponsoring football teams or soccer teams is because you can't advertise your sites in China, and even if people can get onto them with VPNs, it's very hard to get people to find out about them. But everyone watches football, so long as you're on the shirt or in a stadium, people can see the name of it, and that's your little code. But that's how you find us.
You know, and that, as you're describing that in their sponsorship, even I've heard of Manchester here in Western Montana, where people don't think we have electricity or internet, but we do. What do you think the odds are that Manchester doesn't realize what that entity and organization actually is?
Well, they definitely know now, because we've written about it. Colleagues of ours have written about it. There's been enough investigations that demonstrate. We wrote a whole, we contributed to a piece where we actually went to some colleagues of us who are football investigative journalists at Yosemite, which is an amazing investigative journalism group. They managed to trace some adverts for people who were being basically trafficked into working in this compound in Cambodia, to a place called Bavet in Cambodia. So we were living in Cambodia, so we just drove over there, we saw it, we took photos of all the outside, of all the barbed wire. We found out that at least one person had jumped out of a window there because they can't leave. It was a very, very scary place. And then we wrote this article about it, and they demonstrated that the company sponsoring Man City are in there. There's crickets, except I then get a letter threatening me from lawyers they've hired in the UK, a cease and desist. And we said, oh, right, that's great. So you know who Man City are then? Because they're not, not Man City, 8xBet are, because they're not a legal entity that we can work out. They're a brand name. And so to sue someone, you have to, be a legal entity. I was like, so can you tell us who are they and who's in charge and who are you talking to? And then they did not respond to any more emails about that.
So Man City's certainly no. They also have about 101 various financial fair play charges against them right now. Some reason the human trafficking syndicate that sponsors them is quite low on their list of concerns.
That sucks. Yeah, people often, and organizations like that will say that they care. And I'm so less concerned with what people say and so much more concerned with what they do. And if the links are established and they don't do anything, well, I think that kind of says everything in a nutshell right there. That sucks. Okay. Bringing it back to Cambodia here a little bit. So you guys are there. Mechanically, this infrastructure you're describing, the casinos, the dormitories, how do you figure out and reverse engineer what type of scam those people are working on? Because they're obviously there, right? But unless you're, I'm just fascinated by the breadcrumbs. How can you work it all the way back to the origin point?
There's a few different ways that this happens. Often there are thousands and thousands of these compounds, and we know what they're going to be used for because, by looking at them what kind of compound they are, but obviously you don't know exactly who's inside or what company's inside. Often we'll have a victim reach out. In many cases, we've had a victim reach out to us directly or through someone else asking for help because they're trapped, and then they'll share a lot of information about and whatever they can send us about what the scam is and what the scam name company is and the site and everything. At other times, there are people on our network who are very good at this, who will trick a recruiter or someone working in a scam company to open a link which gives away their IP address or their location. and that can be another way of working out where they are. There've been like a whole bunch of different ways to sort of tie specific sites to specific compounds. But yeah, you're right that is incredibly complicated. And also what normally happens is that the owner of a casino and a compound will sublet space to different companies. So they might change every 6 months anyway. They often sell people onto a different company, change the name of the company. So it is incredible. It's just this constant game of like cat and mouse trying to track them down.
And say you've got a building, again, maybe there are 13, 14 stories, and there's been cases where we've worked on the rescue of some people. We've got them out, and then at that point we start talking to them about, all right, now that you're safe, you're secure, like do you feel like talking about the actual criminal work that you were being forced to do? And they'll start opening up about it, but they'll explain that maybe these 20 people are in one room and they're doing one scam, which is a specific type of opener, and they'll be targeting the UK specifically for various reasons. They'll all be trained on that exact role, and then that building might have 4 floors, four rooms on each floor, and every room might be owned by a different organization, and then there's 14 floors. So tracing it back to one building is hard enough, and then tracing it back to the specific company or whatever shell company they have that they're operating under is even more difficult. So it makes it incredibly difficult for law enforcement to do anything in the countries where these people are getting scammed. But then what makes it more difficult as well is that the law enforcement in the countries that it's happening are actively involved in it as well. So you've got kind of no hope of any real arrests ever happening.
How do these massive dormitories end up full of people? I'm sure there's a variety of reasons that people end up there, but I'd have to assume there's a common theme or narrative or threads. I mean, again, I have traveled substantially in the third, fourth, and probably fifth world, more than most people, and I understand that there are times and places and situations where people will do anything to escape. I feel like the people who are ending up in these operations, or the ones who are stuck in these buildings, probably didn't know what they were getting into. So how are they getting these people not only inside of that dormitory, but I'm also curious too, how do they prevent them from leaving? Are we talking about security that is focused not only externally, but internally as well?
Yeah. So an example of someone that we helped rescue from a compound. She's Filipino. She thought she had a job working for Binance in Thailand. She flew to Bangkok, which is seen as a very safe place to get a job. And she was picked up directly from the airport in Bangkok and driven straight to the Cambodian border. And before she really knew what was happening, had been taken across the border to a compound that's right on the border, right? So she didn't even know she was going to Cambodia. And she was obviously getting pretty scared, but she didn't have any way of contacting anyone. She'd also, they also paid for her flight. So she was very aware that she was in debt to them. And it wasn't really until she got into the building and they told her what her job was that she was like, oh God, I'm stuck. And then often what they will say is, you can leave, but you've got to pay an enormous ransom essentially to recoup the money of getting you here and the lost work wages and your accommodation and all this stuff. These places have high walls. They're surrounded by barbed wire. They're policed often by armed guards, or at the very least with tasers. But the scariest thing is that this particular compound, which is very indicative of compounds in the whole region, they pay the local police station $30,000 a month, which in Cambodia is an enormous amount of money to protect them. So she and some of her colleagues, when after they were rescued, told us that at one point one person in their team managed to contact the Filipino embassy and asked for help, and he was then brought in front of the group and beaten like to a pulp in front of them, and then they never saw him again. So they actually thought he was dead. And what actually happened is that they dumped him outside a hospital, having made an agreement with the Filipino embassy that they'd give this one back, but they'd have to beat him as a warning to the others first. So as far as anyone there was concerned, there's no one to contact, there's no one to call, no one is coming for you, no one's going to help you. And then when they were then moved, we were able to get involved in a rescue because they were told they were being sold to another compound at the other side of the country. And during the journey, while they were being driven across the country with a police officer on board as protection for them,
fully uniformed armed police officer on board with the triads.
Yeah, and 2 cars full of armed like Chinese gangsters escorting it on the 12-hour journey across the country. At this point, she'd called us at like midnight saying we're being moved. We're trying to get in touch with anyone who might intercept this bus. And we're calling we're even trying things like anti-human trafficking hotlines in Cambodia, and they're just hanging up the minute we say what's happening. So as far, they're right in thinking that no one's there to help you. And it was this in that situation, there was one police commander who we were put in touch with through our network, who worked out of the area they were being brought into, and so is kind of like a little bit safer because he can't be fired for helping, who helped us to intercept this bus and rescue the people. But when I say rescue, his only option was then to hand them over back to the immigration police, who then hold them hostage in horrific conditions, threatening to sell them back to a different trafficking organization the whole time. And it was an enormous job to try and get them to a safe house and to get them back to the Philippines. It took about 3 or 4 months. So, I mean, that's just like one example of how trapped one person is in this system once they get there. So there's all kinds of reasons why you might end up in it, but once you're there, it's almost impossible to get out.
And, we're lucky enough that we do have loads of contacts that we can call on, but it just goes to show how long that took for us to get anyone who could be trusted, to the point where we were chasing the bus and the 2 cars down. Lindsey had a corkscrew and I had a tire iron, and our thought was, well, we'll just try to stop this bus at some point. Luckily, we didn't, because the 4 Chinese gangsters on board and the cop were all quite heavily armed. But that just shows the desperation, and that's with all of the police, military, contacts, embassies, all trying to help, and you still took probably about 12 hours to actually get assistance. The trafficking routes that these people go through are also quite established, which is quite messed up, right? We know where they're going. So like Lindsey said, they can arrive in Bangkok airport. These people often, it's not like, you hear these stories about people who maybe aren't very educated and get told you're going to get a job in the big city, and then they just kind of fall for everything. These people can have engineering PhDs, and they're just literally offered quite a good job abroad if they come from India or Pakistan. And yeah, you'll take that, right? And then you don't realize until you're in the country. With Cambodia, the people who are still going there, the job offers look really, really legit. But as soon as you land, you're just completely out of control. And if you're in Phnom Penh International Airport, usually the last flight of the day from Vietnam is usually delayed. And we've been on it a few times. And what you see is actually the Chinese gangsters behind immigration. They're on the side that you have to go through, tatted up, standing there, and they take the guys' passports off them as soon as they arrive. And the police are standing there with them. And I went up and said, these guys are getting trafficked, and the cop just pushes you away because they're involved in it. And then you watch them literally get trafficked into a little bus. And then they're taken to, often Sihanoukville, but this is now in about 5 cities in Cambodia. For those that end up in Myanmar, often the route can again be coming into Bangkok, and then they drive you up north. You've got no say in what happens when you're in that car, especially women. Horrendous things happen to them on the journeys, so they can drive 6-7 hours up north. And then they go and stay at the same guest house, usually, in this one town that's on the Myanmar border. They wait until just before sunrise, and then they get put on a tiny boat, or they even can just walk across at times of the year, across the river. Then you're in Myanmar, and you're in these enormous compounds like place called Choi Ko Ko, which is, Myanmar's the middle of a horrific conflict zone. We've managed to get maybe 1 person out of Myanmar, but it's incredibly difficult. And that is the exact same route that they go through every time. And we know that route, but there's still no one there to actually stop it.
Yeah. There are also there are some people that know what they're getting themselves into in terms of the kind of work, but don't realize how horrific it's going to be. But also very often, I've got someone who's become a friend and who is a survivor who I've talked to over many years, who was working in the gambling industry, in the Philippines, until in a few months they're actually banning it. But there's been a big online gambling legal trade, which ended up being quite dominated by Chinese organized crime, and often they when online gambling was still legal in Cambodia, they were part of the same network of companies as well. So some people thought, I'm going to go and work for online gambling in Cambodia. Then they might have heard that actually it's now banned. But
it's not the worst crime.
It's also Southeast Asia, so there's loads of bending the rules and stuff. So you might think, I'm going to go and work for an online gambling company, and it might be a real one. And then they might say, do you want to go and work for this one that is connected to us? And then you go and work for that. And only when you arrive there do you realize, this one's a scam and I can't leave. And then what are you going to do? Who are you going to tell? No one's going to have any sympathy if you were already breaking the law. So there's lots of different channels that you can end up in, basically, sort of some completely innocently, some semi-innocently.
Ladies and gentlemen, this episode is brought to you by Montana Knife Company, a brand that I am very fortunate to know quite personally. They're 120 miles south of, literally 120 miles south of directly where I'm sitting right now. American made, right here in Montana, which makes sense given the fact that Montana is in the name, by the youngest master bladesmith ever in the US, Mr. Josh Smith. Now, if you're familiar with Montana Knife Company, you understand the struggle. It is getting harder and harder to actually get one of their knives. If you've ever gone online on one of their Thursday drops, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I have literally had knives taken from me out of my shopping cart as I am completing the purchase. I believe that either Josh or Jess are doing this personally. I have no data to actually prove that. But there is good news on the horizon if you have been through this struggle with me. They are planning to release 12 new models between right now and the end of the year. 4 of those are going to be in their military/tactical space. He's already released one. It was called the Wargoat, and I'm lucky enough to actually have gotten a hold of one of the prototypes. This one actually wasn't stolen from me, Josh. It was actually given to me by Josh, so I can't really say too much negative about it. This is my everyday carry. This thing is in my fanny pack. You can talk smack about fanny packs if you want. It's where I carry all of my things. But this thing is awesome. Everything about this knife is everything I love about the brand. Quality and construction. They continue to evolve in their quality. The actual final product itself is unbelievably durable. It's unbelievably lightweight. I take it with me everywhere. I never get in knife fights except for with cardboard boxes. And that's the way that I'm looking to live the rest of my life. It's a fantastic brand. I love everything about it, and I love the people who are behind it. If you want to support them, go check out MontanaKnifeCompany.com. And Thursdays, try your luck. Try to get one of their knives. What's life look like for you, regardless if you get there willingly or, you know, and you're hoodwinked? If you end up in the grips of one of these scam perpetrators, I'm assuming you've talked to quite a few people who have actually come or gotten their way out of it. What does a day in the life look like for them?
So often the standard shifts are normally 12 hours, but people often end up working 16, 17 hours because you've normally got, the way it works is that it's not normally that you're being scammed by one person when you're being scammed. There's a production line. So someone's job is to start enough conversations today. Someone else's job is to, once they're on the hook, is to try and build a relationship with them and get them to invest in a platform, however they do it. And then there's someone else's job further up the chain to really squeeze them, and and everyone's following a script. So if you're a low end, I think they're called dog pushers. If you're the kind of low end of that, you're going to basically spend up to 16 hours a day. You'll sort of march from your dorm room of 10 people to the office in the same building, and told you can't stop until you've got, let's say, 10 new people on the hook today. So you've just basically got to try and befriend enough people today until you can stop work. You have your meals inside. If you fail to meet your targets, then you might be beaten. You might be punished in other ways. If you refuse to work, you might be put in torture rooms, which is normally second to top room where really horrendous things happen. But if you fail to meet your targets over a certain amount of time, you either get sold somewhere else, or for women, they often get sold into forced prostitution, online sort of like forced porn. So that's the kind of, you're constantly living under that threat, and you're not allowed to contact the outside world. So that's kind of your day to day.
Yeah, and people don't realize what it is until they actually get into the building, and it can even take a day or two for them to actually know what the job is. They know something's not right? They know they're going over a border, say into Cambodia at 3 a.m, and the border's closed, and some military guys coming out, snapping your passport clearly on the take, and then bringing you over. You know something's not okay, and then you get handed over by armed guys into this fenced up compound, and they say, right, what's your English ability and what's your computer literacy? Yeah. And they're taking a day or two to work out actually what's going on, and they realize, oh wait, no, I'm doing scams on people. That's the job. And often they're actually like building in the infrastructure of these places. So you really, some of the victims we've spoken to have just jumped out the windows, jumped out like ninth floor, and they've broken their legs, and they've just crawled out of these places, and they've been lucky enough to get away. So now what they're doing is they're actually putting nets under most of the high-rise floors. You actually can't get in, but the compounds themselves are scary, weird-looking places. We've snuck into some assets that have just been raided and shut down very temporarily, I'd say, and no one serious is arrested. It's kind of a sham raid, and you go in and there's scripts left. They've taken like notebooks from the local primary school, just probably where you get enough notebooks, and they write down, this is how you scam people from India, this is how you scam people from the UK, and then there's like motivational quotes on whiteboards about how to scam today and be better tomorrow, and how to write a love poem so people pop up with you. fucking nuts.
But this is one of the things that's really crazy about it is, and one of the things that really messes with people's heads when they come out is that these companies do behave like they're just some really crazed sales company. So they'll put people through like a training process, and they'll call people your customers. They don't call them like, your marks or whatever. And they'll like, you get trained on the scripts and everything. And then they'll be like, people have talked about like when someone gets like a particularly big investment, which is, just someone handing over their money, which is now stolen. They'll be ringing a bell and they'll be like, everyone will have to stand up and cheer and chant certain things. And like they'll play certain, like, it's like, it's sort of like, kind of like if you imagine that the Wolf of Wall Street was just scamming people. Like it's kind of like, well, I mean, kind of. Yeah,
that was the exact thing I was thinking when you were saying. I was thinking of the DiCaprio scene, where the people are just losing their shit in the office.
They have mantras that they shout as well. It's not quite the but it's like if you walk past some of these scam compounds at the right time of day when the new shift's starting, you can hear them, and they're usually shouting something in say often is Chinese, but they're just shouting it over and over again. It sounds like the beginning of like a beginning of like a gym or martial arts class when they're all shouting this out, and they're often doing exercise at the same time to get them hyped up. It's like, I don't know, Wolf of Wall Street going into the timeshare business like on crack, and it's just so intense. So people start to believe and get in it, and if they do well enough as well, they might not be allowed to leave, but then they actually start kind of believing in the idea and thinking, I'm also from a rural part of Pakistan or Uganda. I can't make any money. I'm actually starting to make some cash here. Maybe it's okay.
Yeah, obviously it's better for the companies if you are motivated.
Do they get a commission off of the money that they bring in?
In theory, you're supposed to get a certain salary plus commission, but like lots of people that we've spoken to have been told that they're just, no matter what they do, they only find out after 6 months, oh, you didn't actually make as much money as you thought you'd made, so you actually still owe us money, so we're selling you on. So it kind of very much depends on the company, but I think that actually a lot of these companies will, if they have someone who just takes to the work, be happier to pay them a bit of commission and keep them motivated to keep scamming than not. It's just that if you do want to leave, then you're in real trouble.
The vast majority of people aren't paid. They're just told they'll never pay their debt. Basically, you've got 6 more months. But like Lindsey said, if you're really good, then they'll find an opportunity for you, and then it becomes more enticing to stay. But the vast majority of these people are just stuck with no hope and just accumulating more and more debt. And they get told how much debt they have, and they say, so you made $3,000 this month, but you owe us $4,000. And it just all comes off, and it's like, your food and your accommodation costs. So most people will never break even, and they'll just constantly be in debt. So it's much like other forms of human trafficking, right? So whether that's the sex industry or forced labor around the world, people will often be given this glimmer of hope that if you work hard enough, eventually pay off that debt, then you can make some cash, and then you can leave.
And so it's just dangled just a bit further away. Yeah.
So I didn't realize that these rooms, they aggregate conversations across multiple people. How are they tracking this? Is there just banks of computers? And I'm just fascinated by how they actually make this work. And how many conversations would you guys estimate that they have ongoing at any one time?
So on a desk, which might have like 10 people, you'll see these these kind of like giant giant things that all these different phones will plug in to charge at the same time, right? And they normally have about I think most people are given about 30 or 40 phones each that they have conversations with constantly. And so then each one of them will maybe be talking, they'll be given lists. I can't remember what Ramesh said, he's given a list. I think it was 400 names on his first day to get through in the UK. And
that initial contact.
Just to make the initial contact. And so, so you'll be, and you've got like a team, let's say you've got sort of like, I don't know, 40 people in a room, and they've all got 40 phones, and they've all got 400 numbers each day to go after, like on the first stage, right? And then that progresses to the next person. So they'll just like hand over, I guess, the phone number or the phone itself to the person further up the chain when they start a fruitful conversation. But yeah, just kind of, I guess it's just like a funnel situation, right?
Some Indonesian gangsters a few months ago, and they were basically like, "Hey, we're not like the Chinese, we don't traffic people. We just do some scams and gambling, right?" And you're like, okay, so you don't traffic people, and that's like their kind of, their moral line is they don't do that. Most organizations in most countries where this start off with the same model. They start off with willing people who are quite skilled, who are good with computers, who are good at manipulating people, who can make some money. But you realize it becomes about economies of scale. So like Lindsey was saying there about, 40 contacts, the amount of phones, it really just becomes about how many people can you make that initial contact with. And you really just need more thumbs to be able to do that. So kind of the only hope is that you develop AI well enough that we continue to all get scammed, but you don't need forced labor as much. We're not there yet. So you basically, if you're going to make the money that these guys are making, and we are talking tens of billions of dollars, then you need hundreds of people within one company, thousands of people within one room, tens of thousands within one complex.
Yeah, one of the other really insane things about that as well is in the Philippines, where online gambling companies, as long as they're registered, are legal, they actually had a problem just with supply and demand, where because most of the gambling companies were focused on Chinese nationals or Chinese speakers, at one point they just couldn't get hold of enough Chinese speakers in the Philippines. China was trying to stop people from going to work in the Philippines because they were all going to work for these gambling companies that China was trying to get shut down. So they would literally start kidnapping. Legally registered companies were kidnapping people that they thought looked like they might speak Chinese.
In the business district of Manila.
In the business district, yeah. And then you'd keep them hostage. So then it becomes a trafficking and slavery problem. Yeah. And we're seeing another surge just the last couple of weeks in Cambodia, in Sinakville. The Chinese government keeps telling Chinese people not to travel to Sinakville, which used to be a big casino tourism destination, because it's so dangerous and full of scams and online gambling companies targeting Chinese people. And there've been 3-4 kidnappings in the last few weeks of Chinese people in the street. Because they're just like, we need more Chinese speakers.
Yeah, we got Chinese mates after a night out in Cambodia. I'll be like, can I crash on your couch because I don't want to get kidnapped if I go home? And you think it sounds a bit much. You realize, oh shit, no, you might get kidnapped. Yeah, no, that's a good point.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to get into elite shape, or perhaps just make improvements to your current level of fitness, check out the MTNTOUGH digital training program. You can try it for free for 14 days, and you can see the results for yourself. The app allows users to train wherever they are with minimal equipment requirements, whether you're in the gym or you're outdoors or you're at home. Users can access top-tier programming that fits into their lifestyle. The MTNTOUGH app offers expertly designed progressive training plans that guide users from start to finish. These plans are tailored to build resilience, strength, and endurance over time, preventing burnout and injury. The app features self-guided and follow-along coaching videos, allowing users to be coached through every workout step by step. This helps to ensure proper form, motivation, and intensity, regardless of the user's fitness level. The MTNTOUGH app delivers training programs built for the unique physical demands of mountain athletes, including hunters, tactical professionals, and outdoor adventurers. The programs themselves are designed by seasoned strength and conditioning experts, elite athletes, and military veterans. Start your 14-day free trial today and check out the results for yourself. And be sure to use the offer code CHANGEAGENTS, and I'm looking at it as one word, at signup, and you can get 40% off your annual subscription. Remember, use the offer code CHANGEAGENTS at checkout. In the Western world, I'd say the UK for sure, and in the US, I think most people are probably familiar with what is commonly called the pig butchering scam, right? In reference to fattening up a pig before you slaughter it. And this is the innocuous, hey, Nancy, would you like to come? And I've received these texts. Literally yesterday, one of the producers of the show received a text like this. Now, I've gotten these texts. I delete them because I can kind of tell that that's not the way that, it's just not the way that people that I know communicate. Usually there's a little bit off in the way that it's phrased or the communication, but how are people, you're talking about tens of billions of dollars. How does this work? How do they get convinced to invest in air quotes for those of you who are only audio, in or give money to somebody that they have never met just off of text messaging? To me, I don't want to be mean, but I just feel like there is a level of naivete involved in that. And the scammers are obviously preying upon that, or people having a different view of the world and they want to be helpful and hopeful versus being more pessimistic. However you would want to describe it, but how does this turn into a multi-billion-dollar industry?
The really smart ones don't jump in that way. So Carla, who's the Filipino girl I was telling you about that thought she was working at Binance, she told me that one of the scripts they were given, and just like this really famous quote in the kind of scamming world is, "There is no unscammable person. There's just the wrong script." So you have to catch people with what she said, it was very effective, but when they were working, was if you managed to start a conversation with someone, because you said that your colleague was interacting. Lots of people interact, especially during COVID when people were bored. Like they would interact thinking, what's the harm? Even if it's not real, what does it matter? But then what they'll often do is, what she told us that they would do is, on the fake profiles that they were managing, they would, create the illusion of living this really fancy life, often sometimes just by stealing photos off Instagram of actual models and actors and things, people don't know very well. And so they'd replicate what looks like a really fancy lifestyle. And eventually someone says, how are you affording to deal with this? And you say, I actually use this investing site, or I've got a secret tip from my uncle. But to be honest, I don't think you should get involved because it is risky. You could lose money. And they're like, no, show me how to do it. So you make them think it's their idea. And so like you said, that was the most effective one. Because then once you've put money in, they show you all these things to show, they send you all these fake things that show your money is increasing and you doubled your money in a week and stuff, and also these fake platforms.
You get money back for the first few investments, right?
Sometimes they let you take out the money at the beginning. Yeah, sometimes they let you take out a little bit of money at the beginning to prove it's real, and then you sort of put more and more and more in, and then at some point you say, okay, I want to take my money out, and they say, oh, did no one tell you you have to pay like a massive withdrawing tax, either like to the platform or to your own government, but it goes through the platform. So then you put in even more money, and you just keep bleeding you until there's nothing left, and then they cut you off.
But I think like those particular texts we use as an example, I think like most people listen to this will be like, oh, I wouldn't fall for that, right? But that's just like an easy example of one that's happening. And you will have people, maybe they're a bit older and not as used to technology, who could fall for something like that. But there's other ones that, like, they have such a wide range that either of us could get scammed on. Some of them are the grandmother or mother model, where they say, hey, and they'll often find out their child's name. And they're like, hey, mum, it's Andy, and I'm in real trouble. I'm, on holiday, whatever. I need X amount of money. Wire discounting, so I'm in trouble. And people just panic and then do it. There's other ones where
kidnappings, all kinds of things.
Yeah, there's other ones where, like, again, cold calling you on WhatsApp, like that's something I think a lot more people are realizing, be very skeptical of. But there's also dating sites, and people meet people on Tinder or Hinge or whatever it is, and then they start our conversation and it feels like the beginning of a relationship. And then like, well, why have you not met up yet? It's like, well, I was going to, but they were away on business at the weekend, so we've kept chatting. And there are plenty of legitimate relationships that now start on online dating platforms before people actually meet. So it's a really, really good rule generally. If you're ever about to move money anywhere, don't ever do it unless you've met the person face to face. But these people feel absolutely convinced that they have, and they've had video calls. They have the model sitting in the room ready to take video calls, and she might do 50 calls a day, but she's sitting there and they remember all your details, they bring it in, and it's so nuanced and it's so well done that really, like, we're scratching the surface of the scams that we know, but there is a way for them to get really to anyone.
There's also like fake online gambling platforms that make you think you're winning, and then when you try and remove it, there's task-based scams, which might not have any romance scam part to it, which are basically saying that you get paid a small amount of money to write reviews or post photos on an app or something, and then you think you're making this money, and then they'll twist it and say, okay, but to withdraw it, you need to set up like an account, and you need to spend a little money on making your own little shop on this thing so that you can bring more people in, and all. There's always a reason why you have to put in a little bit of money, but you've just spent so much time or effort on something already that you just run with it. So there's just so many different ways of engaging people in these kind of scams.
And those task scams often start with an opportunity to make money as a part-time job that's advertised online. So you do it, you want some remote position, and then you do. So there's always a way. There's now like airline company fake Twitter accounts that we almost got caught out with when we made a complaint on Twitter about getting screwed over when we're flying to Burundi, and then we contacted Brussels Air, and then someone messaged me with a replica account of Brussels Air offering to give us the refund, and we were falling for it. Well, I was falling for it. Lindsey was a bit more skeptical.
After 50 hours of no sleep, when you're exhausted and you have actually just been talking to Brussels Airlines, you don't notice necessarily for a second. And it's only when I said, wait, did they ask you for the same information? Or like, wait, can we just double check that again?
And they asked you to download an app, and that was the thing. Oh, wait, there's something different here, right? But it can get anyone.
Yeah.
And then you don't need to get someone's entire life savings. These horrible stories, and there's good coverage of that now, especially in the States, where people lose, like $800,000 that they have in their pension. They're like a normal person. They're not a multimillionaire, and that's all their money gone. You don't need that. You don't need to lose. You don't need to have that kind of income from each mark. You can get $1,000, $2,000, and if you have 100,000 people doing this every day in Cambodia alone, probably about another 120,000 people in Myanmar, maybe 60 or 70,000 people in Laos, tens of thousands of people in the Philippines, tens of thousands of people in the UAE and Dubai, all around the world, then you don't need that many high-level transactions to be making really, really good income for these huge criminal groups that are also involved in every other type of organized crime you can think of.
Especially if you're using slaves.
Yeah. No, I've actually been on the receiving end of the scam of people traveling or asking for help. That one always appeared to me via email. And then another one I think most people in the U.S. would be familiar with is the call from the IRS agent talking about taxes. Years ago on my personal podcast, I actually kept one of those guys on the phone for 30 minutes and recorded the phone conversation. God, I had so much fun, giving them real information except like 2 numbers incorrect, or pretending I couldn't hear them, or just asking them again for their badge number. Why they didn't realize I wasn't scamming them. I mean, quite frankly, I was just fucking with them at the time. But why they didn't realize that and move on to somebody else, I don't know, because I don't know. It was entertaining for me. When you follow the breadcrumbs of the money, let's say from the Western world, UK, US, where's it going? Where does it end up?
So there's a bunch of different places. We were given most payments are in crypto when they go through Cambodia.
Okay.
So we were given a bunch of crypto addresses from victims who'd been rescued, who managed to write some down. And so you can see that some of these go into like much bigger wallets and move around. Some of our colleagues have done big analyses of these, and the UN did a big analysis where they showed that quite a lot of the same wallets and flows were being used by the Lazarus Group, which was stealing money for North Korea. So some of it's definitely going into North Korea. A lot of it's ends up in China. It's kind of this is just such a huge industry that it's actually quite hard to pinpoint exactly.
But the transnational criminal groups that are running it have become so incredibly powerful and wealthy as a result. So your groups you might have heard, like the 14K triads, these kind of groups, the Bamboo Union from Taiwan, these traditional organized crime groups are making billions of dollars, mostly Chinese, Taiwan, Hong Kong based, with lower level guys from Indonesia, Philippines, on a kind of middle management area. But these huge syndicates are often now making more money from the scam and human trafficking than they are from the enormous drug trade that they're also making huge amounts of profit for. So when you start creating this enormous amount of wealth, it actually becomes close to impossible to really stop it. Like, we think how much success we've had with the so-called war on drugs around the world, right? That was a level of cash that meant that and you had Chris Dalby on recently talking about the cartels.
Yep.
They're incredibly powerful, and it's difficult to stop them. But these guys are making so much money, but it's not that the government's going against them. It's the government has no option but to get involved and actively work with them. Because again, Lindsey mentioned the $30,000 a month, and that was for one rural compound, for one tiny police force. Those police officers are making $120 a month, and they're getting a 30 grand injection from this one compound. So you're talking about such an enormous scale of money that these transnational groups have, links to North Korea, Russia, to cartels increasingly in Central and South America as well. And it's given this enormous boost to organized crime around the world, which is why it's becoming a security issue. I think the US Congress actually declared it as such, as a national security issue, because organized crime groups are just becoming so immensely powerful, and it's so much harder to stop this than most other types of crime.
But also, there are also like specific areas. So one big area in Cambodia that we've become quite obsessed with is how many of the groups that are providing the kind of like infrastructure and logistics of these. So the Cambodian casino owners and people very closely linked to the ruling family, they're often the people who are like the local partners for Chinese organized crime. And they all seem to be setting up fintech companies at the moment, which would allow them to basically avoid any form of like regulation and launder money out of the country. One of these people who also had an online marketplace called Y1 Guarantee, where people were just openly advertising, buying and selling people, buying and selling things that you need to run a scam compound.
Just
like
openly
tasers,
on their chats.
just openly.
Jesus.
He's the Prime Minister's cousin, the former Prime Minister's nephew. He owns property all over Australia, although we've heard that they've just stopped renewing his visa for Australia finally. But people like him, they own property all over Australia, all over Canada.
London, New York.
London. Yeah, it's these networks go really, really far out of the original countries they're in. And in Myanmar, I mean, the money, so much of the money flows up to whoever's in charge of a country, right? Huge payments have to go to the government of Cambodia for this to be allowed to continue. Yeah. But in Myanmar, every side of this insane civil war, which is a very complicated civil war, we won't go into it now, but like all the different groups fighting seem to have different kinds of stakes in scam compound areas, and they're using the money, as far as we can work out, to keep fueling this civil war. So there's all these different reasons why people get involved, but none of them are good.
The compound areas in Myanmar are often in the middle of where some really intense fighting is happening, and they are never hit with either airstrikes or raids from the rebel groups. They are just completely left alone.
Which I'm sure is coincidental. I mean,
yeah, they just forgot about it.
What's going on, everyone? This episode is also brought to you by Allegiance Gold. Gold prices have surged, reaching nearly $2,500, a 20% increase in under a year. With traditional investments under scrutiny, gold and other precious metals have become attractive alternatives. The rise in gold prices reflects growing skepticism towards conventional investments and highlights its stability. Notably, even banks are increasing their gold reserves, underlying its lasting value. Gold isn't just a short-term play, it's a long-term strategy for financial security and growth. Whether you're an experienced investor or just starting, gold should be a part of your investment portfolio. Start securing your financial future with Allegiance Gold, a trusted leader in precious metals with top ratings from TrustLink and an A+ accreditation from the Better Business Bureau. Allegiance Gold can help you protect your IRA or 401k with physical gold and silver, or delivers precious metals securely to your doorstep. If that sounds interesting to you and you go to protectwithandy.com today, listeners will get an exclusive lowest price on the market for select gold bars. That is protectwithandy.com, or you can call 844-790-9191 to talk to an account representative. Now, I was going to ask you guys about, the government response from Myanmar and Cambodia, but in listening to you talk and even, researching this before the conversation, I think it would be, I guess nothing's impossible, but highly improbable that the governments don't know what is going on inside of those districts. And also, like you said, that the money is not flowing upstream, which is allowing them to create that environment where they can do whatever they want. And I guess the question would be, let's say in a perfect world where, for whatever reason, the government shifted, how hard would it actually be for places like Cambodia and Myanmar to shut these things down if they actually wanted to? Say you could remove the monetary aspect. I feel like logistically it wouldn't be that difficult. I mean, they could obviously go to the compounds and raid them and shut them down, but I don't feel like if they wanted to, it would be that difficult of a problem to solve.
No, I mean, from a completely just practical point of view, they could shut them down tomorrow. Yeah. But from an economic point of view, I don't know why that would leave a country like Cambodia. It should, by rights, be in the middle of like a pretty horrendous sort of like property price crash at the moment. It's completely killed off its tourism industry by putting all of its like
tourist and slave compounds.
So like we were saying, we think that the industry is probably bringing in up to 3 times what the official GDP is. And in Cambodia as well, it's a very complicated political system, but nothing can really happen without personal relationships with high level officials. Mm-hmm. And everyone who works in a kind of like state capacity pays up to 50% of their salary to their superior every month in Cambodia, including police, teachers, everyone, right? So all of this money flows up, and then in return for having all this money and being at the top of the pile, the government then will issue development contracts to like Chinese businessmen or whoever wants them. So this entire system has to be propped up by corruption. It has to be propped up by these kind of payments. They can't actually just shift into a normal structure tomorrow. So it's not that they couldn't shut down the physical locations, it's that their economic system would crumble.
The only success there's been on cracking down on this was started about 18 months ago, and it was the Chinese military and the Chinese police inside Myanmar after a few undercover Chinese police were actually killed in an operation. China has been getting increasingly annoyed at these scams because it's becoming very embarrassing for them, because I think still the primary target is the Chinese. They're switching more to Western markets now. But the Chinese is making the government look quite weak, that they can't stop this, where Chinese citizens are running across the world, setting up slave compounds and then scamming, and huge capital outflow coming out of China. So it's becoming a bit embarrassing. Same time, there's also a lot of high-level Chinese government officials who are making an enormous amount of cash on this as well, which complicates it. But when the Chinese decide to crack down, they do have some influence. No one in Myanmar, for instance, really wants to be on the wrong side of China, especially during this conflict. They kind of fuel all sides in a way with weapons and different forms of support. They like a little bit of instability where they can maintain their influence with all these different groups at the same time. So when China says it's time to shut them down, they all go, yes, okay, let's keep on China's side. What happens is they shut down an enormous compound, and 3 weeks, they don't arrest any of the senior guys. They're told beforehand that it's going to happen. A bunch of people are put on a plane, but they're low-level dudes. And then a few weeks later, it opens up again. But it opens up with the understanding that they will no longer target Chinese citizens for the scams. So now you've got a massive increase of Pakistani, Indian, Ugandan, Kenyan, because they all speak English. Citizens being brought over, trafficked into Cambodia, Myanmar, to target the US, Australia, UK, these markets, where China doesn't really care. I mean, I guess why in a sense would they, right? Like, you know, so they do that, and the same as happens in Cambodia. We'll see some raids, we'll see some arrests. And then a few weeks later, that same compound, we've been in one compound that's like on top of this mountain that looks like haunted and covered in mist. It's a crazy enough place in itself. It's got an old Catholic church with a Khmer Rouge like riddled with bullets. It's a terrifying place, but quite pretty. But that one compound on top of this mountain's been raided, 4 times in the last 2 years and reopened
well, it
again
hasn't
within
actually,
months.
yeah, it's not like so much has been raided. It clears out every time they hear a raid is coming.
Yeah.
They move everyone out, sell them somewhere else, move them back in.
Yeah.
And the networks now go all over the world. So you might sell everyone in your compound to a group in like the UAE and, you know, or to Myanmar. And, you know, you have to work out how to get them. So it's this constant just game of like carousel around the world of moving them anyway.
And with the US and China having not the best relationship right now as well, this could really only be properly cracked down on if they had a joint law enforcement effort to do something about it, right? Like targeted sanctions against individuals they're clearly involved in this in a high level, not sanctioning the country, but actually targeting the officials, the crime figures who have property, and you know, around the world, whether that is in China, whether it's in the US, cracking down on their kids going to universities in these places as well. It would be a joint effort, but they've tried to have a joint effort for about 3 years, which we've been looking at on fentanyl, and that's been a complete failure, right? China doesn't really have an interest in assisting the US on this, and the US doesn't really have much bargaining power with China. So the main hope is the two superpowers that have the most kind of stake in this come together, but we're so far from that being the case that really unstable countries around the world with corrupted governments or in desperate need of cash are taking advantage of this kind of gravy train of human trafficking and scams while it lasts.
Well, and we can flip it on its head too, because I agree with you. It would take global cooperation from countries that I don't think are ever going to be willing to globally cooperate. But if we flip it on its head and we look at it not from that aspect, let's from the individual aspect. Like, let's look at this from the victim perspective. Because I think we could maybe have at least a little bit of impact there, and that impact is probably going to come through education that's going to inform people's behavior. What can people do to educate and protect themselves from these type of scams, other than view the world completely pessimistically and think that everybody is out there to try to screw you over, which, as somebody who's tested that theory very robustly, not always the best way to live your life. You might have a smaller social circle than you would want to, but I mean, these scams are real, and they're not going to stop. I mean, I think we can start from that baseline template. So the question is, what can people do to protect themselves?
I mean, yeah, I think you have to be cynical about a message or any opportunity you get that's from someone you've never met that comes completely cold called you. I think that's a big thing. I think what often happens as well is that people are, if there's a romance element to the scam, people are often encouraged to not tell anyone else, like keep the relationship a secret, or anything that's like, oh, only you can fix it and you have to fix it today. Anything desperate in any part of your life. If someone says to you, I need all this money and I need it by tomorrow, don't give yourself any time to think about it, and certainly don't tell your friends and family because they'll talk you out of it. That's obviously a pretty big red flag, right? Yeah. I mean, there's so many. There's just anything that sounds, it's such a cliche to say, if it sounds too good to be true, then it almost certainly is, but that's also true. But it's just, I think, beyond the individual as well, though, there are just so many things that like individual governments could be doing to protect people. There could be like stronger laws about transparency in businesses. So like in the UK, one of the problems was people would look at a site on a company name on a site and say, oh, that's registered in the UK, it must be an above board business. But the UK has a rule where anyone in the world can set up a business and can register a business in the UK to a UK address without even showing identification, and say that it's like, and say that it's there. So we went to one location in the UK where 9,000 scam companies have been registered to. It's an empty shop with just piles and piles and piles of like letters, all from like the equivalent of the IRS, like here behind the door. And this is a basic thing our government could do. They could say you can't just register a business if you've got no presence in the country and you can't prove who you are.
There was a story that came out maybe about 2 years ago, which was about, if you heard, Chinese police stations operating around the world. Like unofficial, but like backed by the Chinese government, basically setting up in Western countries. So there was one in Chinatown in New York. There was one in London. There was one in Glasgow. There's about 140 or so around the world. And what most of the coverage looked at was how they were actually using these as bases. Officially, they were to help Chinese citizens renew their driving licenses while living abroad. But actually, they were threatening students who might talk about Hong Kong or the Uyghurs, right? Yeah. But another aspect of that was they were heavily linked up to organized crime groups, and they're essentially being able to operate in these countries without the government really doing anything. And an example of how this does happen quite frequently is in London, for instance, before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, it was just well known that Russian mobsters and oligarchs with the dirtiest money possible owned like half the city, all of the luxury apartments, and they just sat empty, driving property prices up. And the government did nothing about it because there was a lot of money being generated until eventually we went high on the sanctions, and now we've cracked down on it. So it shows we can crack down when we want to, but we're just not currently doing it. There's not enough of demand, which brings us back to that initial question, which is, this really is about education rather than tackling huge organized crime syndicates, which will only continue to grow in these cracks, right? And so one thing that we do with our organization Eyewitness Project is we try to train police forces, NGOs, governments around the world on some of the signs of human trafficking, how they can protect themselves, and then what they can do to like secure their company or their country or their infrastructure against these kind of groups. But then if we're only at the stage where we're training them, that information needs to get down really, really quickly to the normal person on the street. And if you look at something like anti-smoking campaigns, right? They took maybe like 20 years or so of going really hard, and eventually everyone learned, oh wait, smoking's pretty bad. And now the numbers of people who smoke have been, massively, massively reduced in most parts of the world. Something similar needs to happen here, because we're never going to be able to keep up with just fighting the organized crime groups. Yeah. But we need to be teaching people at schools, universities, every workplace imaginable, so that it's a common conversation that people are having by the water cooler or in the pub or wherever, where they know that if you're contacted in any capacity by someone online and you've never met them, then do not transfer any of your money to that person.
Or what is increasingly awful, and I think it's in the US as well, certainly in the UK, is sextortion scams, where increasingly young, like teenagers and think they've met someone online, and then you send like explicit photos to each other, and then you're squeeze for money, and lots of people end up killing themselves. And I think just understanding, not making people feel stupid as well about it, but like making people understand that you don't trust people that you don't know really, really well, and protect yourself a bit better. But also to remove some of the shame around it. If you get caught out by something like this, you're not going to be educating other people on how they should handle someone who's been exploited, because it's one of the worst things that can happen to you. It's so humiliating. So not making someone feel stupid, not saying how could you be so naive or so stupid as to do that, like educating people to be kind to people in their lives so they can come forward and ask for help. So that before they get any deeper, I think is a big thing.
Yeah. That basic. Yeah.
I was just going to say that I don't think this is an issue that the government will be able to protect people from. I think people will have to protect themselves. And I agree with you, Nathan. I think that education over a long period of time is what will probably slow or help recede the tide. I know we're coming up to the end of our time here. What would you like to close with for the listeners? Final thoughts from the two of you who are living deeply in this world and are watching it on the day-to-day.
I think, I think that just you do have a voice that matters on this. Education is hugely important, but so is putting pressure on the government, whether that's the US or Europe or wherever you are, really making it clear to your MP or your congressman that you care about this. The scams are an enormous issue for anyone who's listening. Everyone can be subject to a scam, and you will all know someone who has been. But there's also one of the world's worst ever slavery crisis happening at the same time. Care about it, talk about it, post about it, make it so it's a big enough issue that when people are running for president or prime minister, that they mention something about this enormous humanitarian crisis that at the same time is something that's happening over in a developing country, and we're not all great at caring about that, but this has a direct impact on you, your family, and your friends losing your entire life savings as well. So we can save people in the most horrific conditions in the world and also save your life savings, but we need to make sure that your governments know that you care about it so it becomes a policy priority.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, it's I think that recognizing that the whole world is connected now, right? Like that's just so important. Like there's no thinking, you can't think there is a crisis happening somewhere else, there is poverty happening somewhere else, and it's not going to find a way to bite you, because it will. That's the nature of us all living online. And so the sooner we crack, nip in the bud, like patterns of exploitation and trafficking abroad, the less likely it is to harm people in the West as well.
Hopefully you enjoyed today's episode, and hopefully you stop responding to text messages from people who have apparently found you via the wrong number. If you would like to see more of Nathan and Lindsey's work or follow along with them in near real time, we have their X, and if you don't know what that means formerly known as Twitter, bios in the show notes below. That's going to be the best avenue to do so. Thank you again for listening to Change Agents, an Ironclad original presented by Montana Knife Company. See you guys next week with an all-new episode and guest.